Welcome to another episode of the Left of Lansing podcast with Pat Johnston. A progressive insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining podcast designed to shine a light on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters, located in his attic, here's the award-winning Pat Johnston.
Yeah! Welcome to another installment of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I am Pat Johnston, and this, everyone, is beautiful, is it not?
I do solemnly swear.
I do solemnly swear
That I will support the Constitution.
that I will support the Constitution
Of the United States.
of the United States
And the Constitution.
and the Constitution
Of the State of Michigan.
of the State of Michigan,
And that I will faithfully discharge.
and that I will faithfully discharge
The duties of the office of.
the duties of the office of
Delta County Board of Commissioners.
Delta County Board of Commissioners
According to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
That was now Delta County Commissioner and friend of the podcast, Kelli van Ginhoven, finally taking the oath for her seat, a seat she richly deserved and won in blowout fashion. Now, you'll recall last week how the Board of Canvassers up there in Delta County refused to certify the recall elections, where Kelli, a Democrat, and two other independents defeated the three right-wing members of the county commission. Well, actually, it was the two Republican members of the Board of Canvassers who decided not to certify the elections, even though the challengers won by a 3-1 margin. And tell me if you've heard this before, they each cited, without evidence, mind you, voting irregularities. Right. Maybe the irregularity is that those MAGA commissioners only lost by a margin of 3-1. It should have been maybe even more. Anyway, that's not within their purview. Those Board of Canvassers are not supposed to check voter irregularities. It doesn't pertain to them. They're not allowed to sit on their hands and cry and complain because their team lost. Their job is to simply certify the results. And I loved how state election board officials warned them that if they failed to certify the elections, then the state would have to get involved and Delta County would pay the costs. Oh man, I'll be darned. Republicans once again wasting everyone's time and money. Say it ain't so. Well, one of the Republicans on the Board of Canvassers reluctantly joined to certify, while one apparently had other official duties to attend at that time. No problem, no matter, whatever. Just remember, though, the right-wingers in Delta County thought they could pull a fast one, thinking nobody was paying attention, but many of us in the state were paying attention. And it's that kind of attention we need this coming November, because they're going to try to do the exact same thing in many counties throughout the state. In the meantime, congratulations, Kelli, on finally getting sworn in and finally getting to serve the people of Delta County. The county there will certainly benefit from your common sense and your wisdom. Speaking of common sense and wisdom, or as I like to call it, progressivism, Delta County is part of Congressional District 1, and that district is currently being represented by right-wing Republican Congressman Jack Bergman. Now, there's a primary going on where one of the Democratic challengers, Dr. Bob Lorinser, is embarking on his second challenge against Bergman. Lorinser lost to Bergman back in 2022, but he believes this time around he has what it takes to not only give Bergman a good challenge, but also to win. Dr. Bob Lorinser is my guest here in just a few moments. But I would like to take just a few moments here to talk about Republican Congressman Jack Bergman. Bergman won his seat back in 2017, and he's been nothing but a champion of the right wing, and especially of dear leader Trump. Bergman voted for the Trump tax cuts back in 2017, which were nothing but a scheme to enrich the pocketbooks of the corporate elite and the donor base, while leaving the rest of us having to pay for them and to fight over the crumbs that they left for us. The Associated Press recently wrote, Trump assured the public in 2017 that the U.S. economy, with his tax cuts, would grow at 3%, but he added, I think it could go to 4, 5, and even between 6% ultimately. If the 2020 pandemic is excluded, growth after inflation averaged 2.67% under Trump, according to figures from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Include the pandemic-induced recession, and that average drops to an anemic 1.45%. By contrast, growth during The second term of then President Barack Obama averaged 2.33%. So far under Biden, annual growth is averaging 3.4%. But that's what Bergman voted for, a failed economic policy with dear leader Trump. Oh, and you recall how all these Republican fellows always claim to be fiscally responsible. Well, after dear leader promised the tax cuts would pay for themselves, the Congressional Budget Office reported in 2019 that the budget deficit rose to $984 billion, nearly $300 billion more than what the CBO had forecast. Now, those of us alive during the Ronald Reagan era in the 80s and the W. Bush years of the 2000s could have told you what the end result was going to be from these tax giveaways to the rich. You didn't need a crystal ball to predict that conclusion. And don't forget, Trump did promise to propose a middle-class tax cut, but never did. And it's easy to forget the middle class. I mean, they're just the working class. They're just the working people, the peasants, the kinds of people not allowed at dear leader's home or his golf courses. But here's the insane part. Jack Bergman wants to make these tax cuts permanent. Permanent. I sound like Mickey from Rocky. Permanent. The Michigan Independent says 102 Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives have proposed permanently extending those tax cuts. Among the co-sponsors of that bill is Michigan Republican Representative John Molinar. And why does my right-wing Republican Congressman John Molinar have to be beholden to the corporate agenda rather than to his people? Why is John always on the wrong side of history? All right, getting back to Jack Bergman because there's more. Bergman co-sponsored a similar bill back in 2018 and will do so again if dear leader wins and Republicans hold Congress this fall. And that'll cost us dearly. As the Michigan Independent says, the Congressional Budget Office estimated in May of 2023 that making the 2017 law permanent would add $3.5 trillion to the national debt through 2033. On May 8th of 2024, it released a new estimate based on a longer time horizon. The national debt is currently around $34.7 trillion. Extending Trump's tax law would likely increase that total by more than 10%. Fiscally responsible. Oh, what a joke. Kind of like the entire Republican Party. Meanwhile, President Biden has called for a tax increase for the richest Americans while keeping the tax cuts in place for those earning $400,000 or less. I mean, the Center for Budget Priorities reported back in March that households with incomes in the top 1% would get, on average, a tax cut of over $60,000 in 2025. And compare that to the rest of us, the Trump tax cut extension would mean an average tax cut of less than $500 per household in the bottom 60%, according to the Tax Policy Center. As a share of after-tax income, tax cuts at the top for both households in the top 1% and the top 5% are more than triple the total value of the tax cuts received for people with incomes in the bottom 60%. You want to know why the corporate media are showing Trump all the time, and while they are putting dear leader Trump in our faces all of the time and downplaying the Biden economy all of the time? Because they stand to make lots of money if the corporate tax cuts are extended. That's why they want Trump back in office. Now, we were promised the corporate tax cuts would lead to lower prices. Has that happened? It's not inflation that we've been experiencing here for the past few years. It's greedflation. And it got so bad that companies like Target and McDonald's suddenly announced, hey, they're suddenly reducing prices because people are doing business elsewhere. Oh, you don't say. Oh, and don't even get me started on gas prices. Yes, state and local taxes, of course, play a role in the overall price of gasoline. But after receiving these lavish corporate tax breaks, you'd think that would lower the cost of gasoline for everyone, wouldn't you? Meanwhile, who just met with big oil execs at his Florida home to discuss a quid pro quo of giving big oil whatever it wants just as long as big oil gives him $1 billion to his campaign? It wasn't Joe Biden. Oh, that reminds me, Jack Bergman also voted against the gas gouging bill, but then he can turn around and blame Biden for the cost of gas. I mean, isn't that clever? Jack Bergman, a family man, a good Christian man, voted against extending the child tax credit, a tax credit which slashed child poverty in half in 2022. But of course, a good family man like Jack Bergman says, make the children suffer more. And thanks to our good friends at the Still Social, they confronted Bergman and asked him if he supported a national abortion law. He stammered a bit and then said something about states' rights before running away. Running away, that's all Republicans ever do. But Jack voted for a Life at Conception Act, which essentially is a national abortion ban, not to mention how it would hurt those seeking IVF methods. Jack Bergman also takes credit for the new funding of the Soo Locks, which allows ships to travel from Lake Superior to the other Great Lakes. But Jack Bergman voted against President Biden's infrastructure bill, a bill that provided the funding for the Soo Locks. But he's simply following what many other Republicans have done pertaining to that bill. Vote against it, call it socialism, communism, wasteful spending, and then champion the spending that your district will receive. In fact, Bergman said in a statement before the vote on the infrastructure bill, and I quote, "I want to expose for my constituents the real truth about the so-called infrastructure portion of the Democrats' destructive $5.5 trillion package. You can read it for yourself in the bill that only a fraction of the funds go to roads, bridges, broadband, and other things people outside the swamp would generally consider infrastructure." That was my best Jack Bergman impersonation, by the way. I mean, Michigan gained around $7 billion in spending on the state's infrastructure, and Jack Bergman voted against it. That spending helped pay for the Soo Locks, broadband access, which the 1st District in the UP and Northern Michigan desperately needs. It helped pay for roads and bridge repairs. It addressed PFAS-contaminated areas and $25 million extra so St. Louis, Michigan can continue to clean up the contamination left over by the old Velsicoal plant. That's helping improve the lives of millions of Michiganders. It's helping improve the environment for the state of Michigan. And Jack Bergman voted against it. And by the way, you heard in Jack Bergman's statement there where he said the word swamp, right? Yep, Jack is just showing he's nothing but a stooge for dear leader Trump. He not only voted to overturn the election hours after the January 6th insurrection, but he joined in that Texas lawsuit where Republicans tried again to cancel out the votes of millions of Michiganders, and I guess even those who voted for Republicans. And if that's not enough, Jack Bergman spent his valuable time trying to get a resolution passed in the Grand Traverse County Commission back in 2021 that essentially would recognize his dutiful service to the people of his district. I mean, he spent time to get a resolution passed praising him. He wanted the Grand Traverse County Commission to waste its time passing this resolution rather than having the commission do the work of its people. And the commission, which is majority Republican, voted in a 3-3 tie, blocking that ridiculous resolution from ever passing. And one commissioner told the AP that he not only voted against the resolution due to Bergman's backing of the January 6th coup, but that, and I quote, "I think everything about this resolution is garbage." Well, that kind of sums up Jack Bergman's career in a nutshell there. And it's why that career must end this November. He's not there to serve the 1st District. He's there to serve his rich elite donors and also to the Christian Nationalist movement in its desire to punish all women. But there are alternatives. Democrat Dr. Bob Lorinser is one of those people trying to defeat Jack Bergman, and he joins me right after these quick words. Don't forget to visit leftoflansing.com, and Rich, thanks for all your hard work on the site.
A podcast devoted to intelligence, sanity, and freedom, or otherwise known as progressive politics. It's Left of Lansing with your host, Pat Johnston. Need to tell Pat where he's wrong? Or do you actually want to praise Pat? leftoflansing@gmail.com is how to reach him. Here's Pat.
Dr. Bob Lorinser is the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Congress in the 1st District, which comprises of Northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. Dr. Lorinser, thank you so very much for escaping from your hectic schedule to talk with us here this week. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well, you've decided to take on incumbent Republican Jack Bergman, who's held the seat since 2017. You ran against him in 22, and you want to give him another challenge here this year. Now, some people who lose a race, they may not really, have that same resolve again to run for that seat once again. What made you decide to give it another shot this year at defeating Jack Bergman?
We're not done yet. A second-time challenger has a better shot of winning. If you look at our small district, I know geographically we're huge, but a second-time challenger probably gains a lot of points. The brand name recognition, the name recognition means a lot. So if you want to defeat Jack Bergman, the best person to do it is a person that will try again. And my personal reason would be, I'm not done yet. I think the first district needs better representation than what we have. That's why we're running again.
I like how you put that. It's almost like incumbency in a way when it comes to name recognition. Since you've already run for the seat, people now will look at you and say, oh, wait a second, this is somebody that we know, we've heard from him before. And maybe because of that, maybe because you've already run and now you're trying again, they'll say, hey, he's really serious in trying to help everybody in the entire district.
And that's correct. If you look at the races that, if we call them re-challengers, they do quite well because of that brand name recognition, because they're starting off so far ahead. So you still got to be a good candidate, correct? You still got to be a good candidate. And we'd like to end up saying, we didn't lose the first time around, we just didn't win. That's why you have to stay in the game. If you get knocked down, you don't just stay down. You get up, you brush yourself off. You say, what did I do well? Let's repeat it. What could I have done better? Let's improve it. And what didn't work at all? Let's forget about it. We're back to representing people in the first district.
You know, I found a story from Interlochen Public Radio back in 2021. And in that story, Doctor, it says that a military veteran who teaches political science from Lake Superior State in Sault Ste. Marie, she told IPR in that story that she really didn't ever see Jack Bergman around the area a whole lot. And this is a direct quote. She said, it's like he strategically just comes and goes as fast as he can and really doesn't have any desire to talk with his constituents. And, you know, to me, it seems like that's a common theme when it comes to not just Jack Bergman, but to many Republican office holders. Is that one of the main reasons why you decided to get back and run again, is because you feel like Bergman's simply not just giving the effort that the people of your district richly deserve?
He's not interacting, discussing, debating, listening to us voters or their families. So if you look at what Bergman does, yes, he stays as quiet as possible. It's his strategy. I think if he actually opened up to town hall and actually listened to us, that would be problematic for him. The last time he's done a town hall was 6 years ago. 6 years ago.
Wow.
We've traveled now probably over 400 events from last cycle and this cycle. The best part of campaigning is meeting people and listening to them. Everybody thinks campaigning should be you go out and you speak and you do a rah, rah, rah. A lot of times campaigning is just showing up in the community and listening to what their problems are. How can the federal government help? What are their goals? Then that's the part. Bergman doesn't do that. He actually goes out among his supporters. You find out that he was in the town after you left. A big part of being a representative is showing up, announcing you're there, inviting everyone to come, even the people that disagree with you, didn't vote for you, because you represent them also. That's what a representative should do. That's what Bergman is not doing, and that's why I'm in the race.
Just because you said showing up, I spoke with Mark Ludwig, chair of the Michigan Democratic Party Rural Caucus last week, and he said the best way for Democrats to start winning back the hearts and minds in rural Michigan is first and foremost, like you just said, showing up. And what have you learned about the people in the first district, you know, through your travels here during the last few times that you've been running, and what drives you the most to want to run for them and want to represent them?
And the people in the first district are great people. I've traveled to about 100 different countries. I worked as a diplomat overseas for 10 years. I've worked in 25 different countries. The people of the first district are just like them. They care for their families. They want to support their families. They want their families, their children, their grandchildren to be better. That's what I end up hearing. So what do you end up hearing in the first district? Probably the same thing that I heard in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Africa, Asia, Korea. We want our children to have a better shot than us. So what is that up here? Livable wages, not just jobs, but livable wages that you can support a family with. We end up hearing about healthcare, that no one should be able to go bankrupt. 70% of our bankruptcies are related to medical care. We hear about education. affordable and accessible education. We hear about protecting the environment, especially the younger groups are worried about, am I going to have a planet to live on? We hear about, related to that, is sustainable green energy. We hear the same thing over and over and over again, no matter what county I have traveled to. Childcare, elderly care, mental health. The federal government can have a role in some of these areas, and Bergman is not supporting anything of that. I hear they want hope. They want us to give them hope. They know winning could be difficult. They know it might be a long time, but they want hope for a better tomorrow. So I'm here fighting for our families, our freedom, and our future. And I hope to give them, I hope to give them hope, but I want to be a person that they could trust. If you don't trust somebody, you can't give them hope. That's what I'm doing. I'm out and about listening, traveling to people. I'm after to give them some hope that in the short term and the long term, we will address their problems.
Is that what you mean by rebalancing the scales? I've seen you talk about that a few times. Is that maybe what your campaign message is essentially about, is balancing the scales to direct things more towards the people of your district rather than always the direction we've been going here, which it seems like it's been kind of stuck on trickle-down economics for many years?
Yeah, trickle-down economics has never worked. It started probably in the 70s. It has never worked. It still won't work, so we can't depend on that. As a representative, I need to represent my first district. Just look at the demographics. We're older, we're having less children, we're very, very rural area. So we need to pay attention. The representative needs to pay attention to the first district. That's lacking on Bergman. But also as a representative, you represent our state and our nation to the world. I think we could do a much better job of that. You know, General Bergman is more concerned that if you call him Mr. Bergman, he'll actually stop you and say, I'm General Bergman. As for me, if you call me Dr. Bob or Robert or Mr. Lorinser, I'll listen to you and let's talk about the issues. So yes, we need to rebalance. We need to rebalance a representative that lives in the district, that cares for the district and listens to the district. Not happening. Bergman probably spends more time in Louisiana with Cindy, his wife, in his house there than coming up over here. I live here, I work here, I pray here, I play here. That's quite different than my opponent.
I was about to ask you, Doctor, where does Jack Bergman live?
Yeah, where does he live? All representatives, right, will need a place in Washington, D.C. So he has a nice apartment in Washington, D.C.
Of course.
He has a summer cottage in Watersmeet, Michigan, right on the Wisconsin border. When he first filed, it was not even a house, but he called it his residency. But his main residency is in Louisiana. His house, you could look it up. He has a very nice house in Louisiana. That's where his wife lives when she's not in Washington, D.C. Their place in Watersmeet is a cottage. It's $1 million cottage, mind you. You know, we call them camps, but they're so close to Wisconsin, they call them cottages. It is not even plowed in the winter. Can't even get into it. So no, he doesn't live there. And what really bothers me about that, he claims that as his homestead, robbing Gogebi County of about $4,500 a year for school support, you know, the millage. In my mind, it's against the principles of the law for homesteading. His homestead is really Louisiana, not Michigan.
Is it true Bergman spent some, just call it valuable time, trying to get the Grand Traverse County Commission to praise him via some kind of resolution? And if so, I mean, he's a congressman. What's he doing, wasting a county commission's time just so that it would, from my reading, it would just be officially appraising him? I mean, that sounds very Trumpian to me.
Appraising him of what, you mean? Sorry.
He wanted a non-binding resolution, just kind of praising him for all the work that he does. And it ended up tied 3-3. It didn't pass because actually some of the Republicans on that commission, they just said, I don't think this is really like our kind of business that we should be doing here. So, but it just sounds like he's following in like the steps of Donald Trump in that way. Praise me at all times.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Even when the Traverse City, if it was the county commissioners, it's like 5-2 Republicans over, Democrats. And they didn't even support that. I'd be very curious that if he stated that, please, if I was one of the commissioners, I would say, Mr. Bergman, please give us your top 10 things that you have done for the first district. And I would think that he would have trouble after number 1 or 2. And I'm not sure what number one or two would be outside of a misinformation. Like, for example, this week, he states, it's myself and Trump that got the SULOCs funded. Not true. Jack Bergman voted against the SULOCs, the $500 million coming to the SULOCs. He voted against it and he took credit. And just last week, he said, Trump and myself take credit for that. Not true at all. It bothers me more that a person claims they're responsible for something when they voted against it. The second part that bothers me, he voted against it.
How can he say that he supported when he voted against the funding that was part of the Infrastructure Act? I don't understand that. Does he think that we don't? I mean, do we not have Google?
Yeah, we do have Google, don't we? But the misinformation, the disinformation that is probably has taken off in the last, 4 to 10 years is amazing. And I think a lot of people think they could get by with it because people won't fact check. The best way to save democracy is the informed voter. Like you said, I could look that up, and I call him Dr. Google, right? I could look it up in Dr. Google, but a lot of people don't. And if you look for the truths behind things, sometimes it's more difficult to find. And if it's a general in the Marine Corps that's saying so, it must be true. If it's a representative, it must be true. Most of the stuff that you're finding out that Bergman claims is not true.
Something that everyone must know, Doctor, is that Republican Congressman Bergman is an extremist or votes at least for a far right-wing agenda. That includes trying to overturn the 2020 election after, of course, Michigan voted for President Biden by 3 percentage points. But what I find even more, for lack of a better word, gross is that he voted to overturn it after the insurrection on January 6th. And Bergman says he doesn't even regret it. He also took part, I think, in that Texas lawsuit in which Republicans across the country, they tried to overturn the election. Of course, that failed, but still, he put his name on that one. Is it wrong to be disturbed that Bergman gives more loyalty to one man or his party than to the people that he supposedly serves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, he tried to disenfranchise all votes from the Michiganders, right, in the first district. Stop the steal. Bergman was integral member of the Antrim County episode that PBS and CBS had 1 hour special on. People do not understand how close he is on the insurrection. I'm still waiting when Bergman's name is going to come out with all the other Republicans with the insurrections of what he did behind the scenes. His support is so close to the extremists. He is as close to the Freedom Party as you could get without being a member of the party. He probably enjoys being with Marjorie Taylor Greene more than anybody else. I don't understand how we can vote for them. Us Yoopers and Northern Michiganders, who are we? We're very ethical people. We're kind people. We help our neighbors. I don't understand how he could get the support in our area just based on morals and ethics.
I just don't believe the people of your district, one, desire to have that kind of extremism representing them. As you well know, 3 MAGA Republicans were ousted in recall races up in Delta County, the Board of Commissioners there, in convincing fashion, too. Convincing fashion. Right. But that didn't even prevent some right-wing people on the Board of Canvassers trying to initially refuse to certify the election because of their extremist views and devotion to party, and because that means more than anything else to them. Now, of course, one of those officials eventually did relent and certify the election last week after a huge outcry from the people. And you know what? I think it wasn't just Delta County. I think you were seeing an outcry throughout the state. But I just think the recall elections up there, just in Delta County, I think that just shows how people simply want somebody to get things done in a sane and productive manner. And I think it's a start of something that's building in some rural areas in the state, especially up in your area. What's your take?
I'm very close. Marquette County is right next to Delta County. So with those county commissioners, I spent time with them just last week. I served pancakes with a Women of Still, right? The Women of Still, which is the still workers, serving pancakes to raise money for a YMCA pool. That's what Delta County people want. They want to improve on their county. They're trying to get like a pool for the children to swim in. They want livable wages. They want health care. They want problem solvers, not creators. So I think that's why they won with overwhelming, right? Was it 70, 30, 40 points? Unbelievable. Yes. Absolutely unbelievable. But they're getting people that are saying we've had enough. And if Delta County could end up doing it, other counties should follow suit. And it comes from grassroots. right? Reaching the voters. Delta County didn't ask probably anybody downstate. They didn't ask nationally. They went and knocked on doors and said, how can we work together to make where we live a better place? And our county commissioners are not currently doing that. Those three knocked on doors, held events, and people listened. And I find that very encouraging. I really do. I would rather get rid of the R's. I know we could talk about I'm a D, right? Democrat, Republicans. Let's elect people into Congress or into your local government or your state government that want to problem solve and not destroy. They want to work together, collaborate, cooperate, compromise to get things done versus power grabbing. That's what I thought we are in the first district. Reasonable people that look for solutions.
We brought up the infrastructure bill that Jack Bergman voted against, and that also included funding to expand rural broadband access. And you and I, we were talking about that before we officially started the interview here. How much will that funding help your district? But also, what else must be done to ensure that everyone there receives reliable and affordable broadband service? Because that's very important.
Connectivity, isn't it? The first district needs connectivity. Connectivity would be transportation. It could be buses. It could be rail, air, and internet, TV. We need connectivity. Broadband is essential. Broadband is no longer optional. It's essential. Just like me and you were talking about, I didn't have access even this morning. I live in a rural area of Marquette County. So we need to fight for this. The infrastructure brought in billions of dollars, and Michigan got, over $1 billion, and we're getting some of that. We're not all the way here yet. Let me compare that to what Jack believes. Bergman believes that it should have been private enterprise to bring internet in, internet broadband in. He worked for that for 6 years. It got absolutely nowhere. Then the Democrats, with support of the infrastructure and some other bills, passed it, and things are happening. Without connectivity in the first district, we will not be able to have just livable wages and jobs. We need the connectivity to get livable jobs. Livable jobs will give us taxes. Taxes will give our infrastructure support to have the soccer fields, the schools, the senior citizen center, the arts and the crafts that people need. We need infrastructure, and I am so proud of the Democrats throughout our state and throughout the nation. Our infrastructure in our nation has been neglected for 2-3 generations? If you did not take care of your house with repairs, what would you be living in? There's how rural America will thrive again. Rural America will thrive with infrastructure. Top of the infrastructure, you said it, broadband. Then we need healthcare and we need education. Those are the three really important things I'm running on. Bergman believes healthcare is your own responsibility. Too bad that you can't have an affordable job. Just work harder. You're already working 2 to 3 jobs. How can you work harder? He doesn't understand the majority of the people that live here.
Doctor, you've seen how our country's medical system works, obviously, in your profession, and how it compares to other developed nations. Is that why you've become a proponent for some kind of a Medicare for all kind of plan?
Let me say I was a proponent before I went into the diplomatic service. I'm a social worker and a public health person and a physician. Our healthcare system has been broken for a long period of time, and I've been advocating for that for a long period of time. Medicare for all is just, right now, it's what people understand. Our healthcare in the United States is expensive. For $4.7 trillion, which averages about $14,000, $15,000 per person per year. Medicare for all is not free. It is not socialism. It is not socialized medicine. It's a single payer system that covers all Americans from birth till death about medical care. I believe a long time ago, medical care is a right, just like I believe education is a right. Medicare for all could do it pretty well. It could do it as a single payer system, saving $500 billion a year. You know what you could do with $500 billion? This is per year. That's what it saves. Because you get rid of the administrative part, the billing part, you get rid of all that stuff. Americans still have to pay for it. It's expensive, but we'd be so much better off. And with that $500 billion, we could have subsidized childcare for those that make less than, say, 150% of the state's median wage. We could have pre-3 and 4 kindergarten. We could have eye, vision, and hearing for every American. We could end up having just amazing things. We could have paid family leave and medical and family leave for all Americans as a federal benefit if that's how we chose to spend that $500 billion. And after all that stuff I mentioned, we'd have about $200 billion left to help pay off the national debt. Don't you think that's a win-win? And if you want to reference that, Google that one. And if you have a hard time, I could show you the references. It comes from nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. It comes from, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Things are possible. All you have to do is look for solutions. And my job as a representative, I'd love to do the opposite of Bergman, is to be the representative, come to Delta County, come to Gogebi County or Alcona County and said, can I give you an update? Can I tell you about Medicare for All? Can I tell you why it's reasonable to support education? Because that's the future of our generation. And if my travels throughout the world will say the same thing. Look at Europe, look at Japan, look at Korea, and talk about student debt. They don't even know what you're talking about because they understand that the youth and retraining education is the future. And if you hamper that, you're going to pay a much greater price. So that's what I'm on the campaign trail for. That's why I'm trying to support, including rural America. I'd like to be a champion of rural America. I'd love to be able to represent rural America because I understand it well because I live here.
If there was one thing, because you brought up student debt, you brought up education, like if there were like one or two main things that you really would push in Congress when it comes to education, they would be?
For education, we need pre-3 and 4 available. It's not mandatory, but available. It's just like Head Start. For every $1 you invest, you get $7 back. So we need to invest in our education even more. When we stepped ahead of the Russians back, remember Sputnik days? That's when Eisenhower basically said, we need to get our education. They bumped our education from like 4% to over 12% of the federal budget. Now we're back again to like 4 or 5%. So we need to reinvest in education all the way. And then the second one is we need to reinvent education. Education should not, it's almost turned into like medicine, a business. Education is more than the four walls of a college or a Votex training center. We need to reinvent education to make it affordable and accessible to all ages. I'm just not talking about the younger folks. And when you make it affordable and accessible, then you'll address the student debt. That $1.5 trillion of student debt, it's stopping people. We need to solve that problem on a long-term basis. On a long-term basis, we need to solve that for all Americans.
And especially because I think when it comes to younger people dealing with the student debt for both Gen Z and even for millennials too, it then prevents them from participating in other aspects of our economy because they don't have the money to pay for anything because they're always having to pay off this debt.
Yeah. If you look at the millennials are probably hit even harder than the Gen Zers, right? And the alpha people are just starting. I just had conversations with maybe a dozen of them just a couple of days ago. And they said, I'm not paying off my student debt because something needs to change. Well, then somebody asked them, well, how are you going to buy a house then? You won't have a credit ranking. They said, I can't buy a house. What are you talking about? I don't make enough to buy a house. Isn't a house are too expensive? We need to give back our younger generations hope of a better tomorrow. I think a lot of people have lost that hope. And maybe that's why they're disengaging. And if they don't have the hope, they don't have the money, they don't have the resources, it's almost like the forgotten generation. My parents were the silent generation. I'm afraid that we may have to relabel the millennials and the Zers as the forgotten generation. That's a crime. That is a national crime.
If people would like to get involved with your campaign, Doctor, how can they do so?
Go to votedrbob.com. That's votedrbob.com. We have a great website. If you like to, it's on the top. It will have our visions. If you want to see where we stand on Gaza, the Palestinian issues, education, Medicare, healthcare, it's all there. And there's a donate button. There's also volunteer buttons. Look at our website. It's well done.
I'll make sure to also include a link of your website on my page as well, leftoflansing.com. Dr. Bob Lorinser is the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Congress in the 1st District. Thanks so much for taking some time out to be on with me. Good luck in your primary. And if you win, I'd love to have you back on once more in the fall.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're listening to Left of Lansing. If the podcast isn't enough and you are in need of more Pat, follow him on Twitter and like him on Facebook. Also, don't forget you can read more of his thoughts and hear an archive of past episodes on leftoflansing.com.
Yeah, as I said, I'll provide a link to Dr. Bob's campaign site located at leftoflansing.com and wherever you get your podcast. And as he noted near the end of our talk, he also included some of his stances and thoughts on what's happening in Gaza. And I have to tell you, I'm not particularly happy with myself for not asking him a question on that rather important issue, since it seems to be tripping up some Democrats. And that's what I would like to focus on for this week's Left of Lansing Last Call. On Dr. Lorinser's site, he's calling for a humanitarian pause in the conflict over there, in which all Israeli prisoners are released and where Israel can continue to eradicate Hamas while protecting the lives of civilians and the right for Israel to defend itself. Republican Congressman Jack Bergman believes we shouldn't hold any restrictions on Israel and that the United States must fork over whatever the right-wing Israeli government wants from us. That's a strange stance for someone who's aligning himself with the so-called America First crowd, and that's my main question I have for the America First crowd and anyone else aligning themselves with dear leader Trump. Are you okay handing billions and billions of dollars to another country with no strings attached? Because it seems like many of you believe we should just keep funneling more of our tax dollars to Israel. I mean, how can you call yourselves America First if you're willing to spend billions of our tax dollars to Israel? It just doesn't compute. Now, let's not kid ourselves. What's happening in Gaza is an atrocity by the right-wing Israeli government. I think huge news broke this week when Norway, Ireland, and Spain recognized a Palestinian state. And that's really big. Yes, it was just a symbolic move, of course, but still a move I didn't think I would ever see happen. And it really upset Israeli right-wing President Benjamin Netanyahu's government as they call for the immediate return of their ambassadors from those three countries. Now, this happened, of course, during the same week in which the International Criminal Court prosecutor asked the ICC to issue arrest warrants against the Hamas leaders and also against Bibi Netanyahu. Let me remind you that the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin for his warmongering in Ukraine, and the United States celebrated that. We were all for it. Unfortunately, the U.S. and the Biden administration this time admonished the ICC for doing the same thing against Netanyahu. And that's what's dividing the Democratic Party, especially with the youth vote that the party across the nation has coveted heavily during the last three election cycles. As I stated on Twitter the other day, I kind of seem to remember when believing in the strength of international institutions was a big difference, a big divide between Democrats and Republicans. We kind of loved engaging with our international partners. I mean, this strategy of always backing Israel's extreme right-wing government continues to baffle me. I mean, hell, at least Obama made Bibi use the back door when he entered the White House. We don't even do that anymore. I simply don't understand why the Biden administration and many in the Democratic Party believe this stance is sustainable after nearly 35,000 Palestinians have been killed and after Cindy McCain, the American director of the UN World Food Program, and I really wouldn't necessarily call Cindy McCain a leftist, described northern Gaza to be in a full-blown famine. And we know full well that many in Washington and in Israel don't have any desire to find a two-state solution over there. And that's why I applaud most of the young people who are protesting peacefully on college campuses everywhere. Now, I don't condone what some of those University of Michigan students did when they protested at the homes of the Board of Regents members in the middle of the night. No. You can't do that. It's counterproductive, and it doesn't exactly spread a message of peace. Michigan Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer was correct to describe those who did that as crossing the line. However, I also don't condone the University of Michigan sending in police and riot gear to clear the encampment of students who were peacefully protesting on the campus. 4 student protesters were arrested. I mean, those students didn't look entirely dangerous, and it just sucks that University President Santa Ono hid behind so-called fire regulations when we all know he directed this move ahead of his appearance in front of Congress this week, which will be yet another show hearing by the right-wing Republican Party. Republicans, by the way, who back dear leader Trump and his history of anti-Semitism. I mean, these hearings are nothing but Republicans highlighting their hatred for these demonstrations that are happening on colleges and universities because they hate colleges and universities. Again, the American First crowd always seems to be more for Israel than for free speech rights of their fellow Americans. But this issue continues to plague the president and his administration, let's be honest, and it's a problem I could see coming and many others could see coming miles away. So it's no wonder that Michigan Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens from Birmingham is facing a primary challenge. I agree with many of Congresswoman Stevens' stances, naturally, especially on the environment and abortion rights. However, her steadfast support for this right-wing Israeli government and its atrocities in Gaza are causing her some trouble, and it's something I can't agree with. As the Metro Times reports, Stevens is facing a challenge by progressive Ahmed Ghanim, who helped co-found the anti-Trump group known as Metro Detroit Political Action Network, and he's also an activist who works in healthcare management. He's running against Stevens for her staunch support for Israel, no matter how much killing it does. I mean, this is an issue we cannot ignore. It's an issue that's dividing the Democratic Party, while Republicans are all together in wanting to just funnel more money to Israel. It's an issue that we progressives must stand up and say enough is enough. Be bold, Democrats, and hold the right-wing Israeli government to account. Again, it is an extreme, right-wing, corrupt Israeli government. Hold it to account. If voters see no daylight on this issue between both parties, then I'm afraid it'll end up costing us.
You're listening to the Left of Lansing podcast. The music you're hearing is by Wanderbeats. To hear the latest project, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site. Now back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of The Left of Lansing. Next week, ProPublica's Andy Kroll will join me. He's written a terrific piece on the extreme right-wing radicalism that's engulfing the entire Michigan Republican Party, so much so that dear leader Trump isn't extreme enough even for them. That's happening next week. Special thanks again to Dr. Bob Lorinser for coming on and sharing his viewpoints on a host of issues. And remember, if you have thoughts, concerns, or criticisms, just email me, leftoflansing@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, the Gram, and Left of Lansing is now on YouTube. So please subscribe there, and don't forget to subscribe to Left of Lansing wherever you get your podcasts. Have a safe and great Memorial Day holiday. Until next time, take the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
The Left of Lansing podcast was produced by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and hosted by, yes, Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. And thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. Remember to visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to the Left of Lansing podcast.